Okay, recording is started.
Hello, everyone. We are very excited to start today with our first workshop in the academic job workshop series. So we're gonna wait maybe one more minute and then continue. Okay, hello, everyone. I am Ariadna Gonzalez Solis. I am an NSF postdoctoral fellow at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I study membrane and trafficking in plants. And I will moderating this webinar today. But first, let me introduce Plant Postdocs. So we are a group that started in 2019. Sunil and Arif are the founders of Plant Postdoc, and we are basically a community of postdocs working in plant-related fields with the main goal to share resources, opportunities, and also help each other in our next career move, trying to find a permanent job in academia and in industry. And so all the work we do in Plant Postdoc is done by this leadership team. We are currently 5 postdocs and scientists from different institutions in the US and also in China. And we also thank our past members in the leadership team of Plant Postdocs. We also have an advisory board with faculty from different institutions, and then also members from different industries who really guide us and help us make different decisions to have these Plant Postdoc events. And so let me just talk a little bit about our journey so far in the last years and all the resources that we have. So we have different presence in social media. We have around 8,000 followers on Twitter. We also have a Slack with about 400 members in which we discuss about job applications, interview different positions. We also have a YouTube channel in which we post the different webinars that we host each semester. And the different topics that we have covered in this type of webinars are academic and job in industry jobs, and also fellowship application, science writing, science communication. So I really encourage everyone that has not been able to see some of our webinars. They are all posted in this YouTube channel. We also have a potential plant peer reviewer database in which we ask if you want to volunteer to peer review. This is a list that is distributed to editors of plant science-related journals with the main goal to help early career scientists to get experience reviewing manuscripts. We also have a WeChat group with over 400 members where we also communicate with people from China. And today we are very excited to start this webinar series and the job workshop series. And as you can see here in our flyer, we will have 4 different installments. So today we start talking about the research statement. We continue next week talking about the cover letter, then teaching and diversity statement, and we finish with research chalk talk. So we are very, very excited to have this going on. And also along with this seminar series, we are very excited to have this first Sahyadri Outstanding Plant Postdoc Award. And this is basically an award for highlighting exceptional postdocs in plant-related fields who are currently applying for US academic jobs in tenure track. So please, if you have any doubts about this, please contact us, Plant Postdoc, and all this information will be shared in our social media and also in our website. And so with that, I would like now to introduce our speaker of today. So today we're very happy to have David Lowry with us. David Lowry is an associate professor at Michigan State University in the Department of Plant Biology. And he's a team leader of the DOE Great Lake Bioenergy Research Center and the associate director of the MSU Plant Resilience Institute. He received his bachelor's in genetics in plant biology from the University of California, Berkeley. His PhD dissertation was at Duke University, focusing on understanding the evolutionary genetic basis and adaptation of speciation in the yellow monkey flower. He then went to do a USDA NIFA postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Texas in Austin, where he conducted research on the genetics and physiology of environmental stress tolerance in switchgrass. After a short stint as an assistant professor at California State University in the Monterey Bay, he then joined as faculty in Michigan State since 2014. So with that, welcome, David, and we are very excited to see what you have for us today.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to try to get my slides up and make sure that they're working, and then we can get started.
In the meantime, while you prepare your slides, I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A. And then at the end, once David is done with his presentation, we will have time for Q&A session. Thank you.
Okay, are we all set? You can see that well?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so today I'm going to talk to you about preparing a research statement for the U.S. academic job market. And this is all of the things I'm presenting here have come out of working with postdocs over the past 4 or 5 years, where we've had a group of us get together, especially at MSU, and talk through how to write application packages, especially targeted for research intensive jobs, but also teaching university jobs, especially in the United States. And from that, I've learned a lot of things about the process and gotten a lot of different questions from various people. And I'm trying to cover a lot of the main topics that you'll want to be able to address with putting together a research statement today. So, of course, we've left, I think, plenty of time at the end for questions and answers, which you can add to the Q&A with the webinar. And I believe that these slides will be available afterwards, so you'll be able to look at them then also. All right, so first of all, we got to think about like what a research statement is and what we really want it to be. And one of the things that's really important is that it's got to be able to explain your research and make it come alive. So you have your CV, and you're going to be submitting that with your application package. But in many ways, the CV is a very dull instrument. It only has your list of publications, your list of places where you've given talks and all these other things, but it doesn't really explain the significance of what you've done. And it's really important to be able to explain that significance, because the people on the search committee are often going to be well outside of your field of interest. And so they may read a title of a paper on your CV, and they're not going to be able to know what that means. And also, you're going to have a lot of research that's ongoing that's not published yet. And so you really want to have a way of explaining what you've done in the past research-wise, what you're doing now in terms of research, and what you're going to be doing in the future. Another key thing about a research statement is that you don't want it to be too overly detailed. A lot of times you'll see applications come in and they'll get into the nitty-gritty details of like how a particular experiment is done, and that'll take up a lot of space. But really what you want to be able to do is have a high level overview of your research. And so you're talking about the greatest hits of what you've done and what you plan to do. And you're explaining throughout and reminding the reader, why is this significant? And why is this going to be important? And why would bringing you to the university add an element to the university's overall research portfolio that's going to be like really exciting for them? A key thing, and I'm going to talk about this multiple times, is that the research statement has many parts to it, but probably the most important part of the research statement is the introductory paragraph or paragraphs. And this is your opportunity to really say upfront who you are as a scientist and what the big questions or issues you're taking on in terms of your research. And so working on this can be really important. I'll get into more details on that in a bit. Another thing to aim for when writing a research statement is that you want to be able to write it in a way that you can reuse it. So the nature of the academic job market is that there's lots and lots of jobs out there. You're likely going to have to apply to many of them in order to get an interview. And then you're going to have to apply to even more in order to get a job. And the reason for that is that universities have very different needs. And so even if you are exceptional in many ways, you might not fit into what that university or department needs at the time. And you as an applicant often is not going to know what that is. And so you're going to need to, most of you are going to need to apply to a lot of different jobs. And you can do yourselves a big favor by putting together research statements that are generalizable, that really capture who you are as a scientist and need only minimal revisions in order to submit to a different job call. And so if you can think about that and come up with that, that can be very good. And what you can do then is rely on your cover letter, especially. And I know you're all going to hear about cover letters coming up, but that's your real opportunity to customize your application package for different academic jobs. And so if you can make a very general research statement, you may only have to change it a little bit to apply to different types of jobs. Sometimes you have to change it a lot because the job is very specific, but hopefully for most jobs, you won't have to change it. Of course, there are different required lengths, anywhere from 2 pages to what seems like unlimited. So you might want to have like different research statements available to you. You might want a 2-page one, 3-page one, 4-page one that are available to you that you can then submit depending on the job call. I would never go past 5 pages on a research statement. Usually a 4-page, if there isn't a length, I would usually stick to around 4 pages long. Okay, and that's what I was going to say here is that you really want to have those different length research statements set up and ready for you to submit. Now, what you want to try to avoid is, especially for those short research statements that are only a 2-page length requirement, you're going to want to avoid the temptation to use small font sizes or increase the margin sizes. You're just going to make the search committee people grumpy. And so you want to make it readable. A lot of us are getting older. We're getting close to needing bifocals. And so, please keep the font size at a reasonable size, thinking about like 11-point Times New Roman or something like 12-point Arial or something along those lines, so that it doesn't get so small that it's hard for people to read. Maybe I'm wrong with Arial. I don't use that font very much, but figure out what it is, ask other people whether or not they think it's like a good size. You want to make sure to focus on being clear and concise. So again, you should be able to, even though you have lots to talk about, be able to explain at a high level, like what's really important about what you've done and what you will do in 2 pages. And that's a skill to be able to develop in general for writing proposals within your university later, for writing grant proposal and things like that, is to be able to get a lot of information into a short document and make it very coherent still, and still be able to tell very clearly what you are as a scientist, or who you are as a scientist, and what you're planning to do. Again, remember to keep things high level, and always remember that you want to continuously be explaining the significance of your research. You don't want to get too lost down the rabbit hole of just having details of methods and not actually telling us why you're actually doing that thing or why you have done that in the past. As I mentioned before, the first paragraph of the research statement is absolutely crucial. And this is partially because of just writing in general, right? It's like you want to have a strong introduction, but also keep in mind that the search committees often are going to get 100, 200, some search committees get 600 applications. And so you want to have something that really quickly captures the reader's attention, tells them, A, who you are as a scientist, and B, kind of what are the big challenges or questions that you are going to take on in your research. And this probably you can fit in 5 sentences or so. And if you can do that, that's amazing. And that's what you're really aiming for, maybe 5 to 7 sentences. This paragraph I found in my past work with postdocs is one of the more difficult things to put together. And because it really forces you to think about, who are you as a scientist? Until this point of applying, you're kind of like going along, you're following the research that's interesting to you, but you're not maybe thinking about how you're going to be viewed as a scientist going forward and what you want to be known for. And you may resist this and say, I don't want to be fit into a box. I don't want to be called an ecologist or this type of scientist. But it really helps to be able to identify what is important to you as a scientist and be able to clearly say that in a concise manner. Because then the people reading this are going to say like, oh, look, we've got so-and-so who does this, and we're really excited about that. And that fits into what we need here because of X, Y, and Z. And so do yourself a favor and think through this and spend a lot of time thinking about who you are as a scientist and how to construct that first paragraph and get feedback from others on that. So when we look at research statements and examples of them, I see 2 major approaches to the structure of those statements. And there's lots of different ways you can put this together. You see all different kinds of ways that people put this together. But 2 different ways that you see most often are, first, approach 1, where it's people outline the arc of their academic career. So they're talking about the accomplishments that they had in graduate school, and then as a postdoc, and then they lay out their future directions. And they'll often end with some kind of future vision statement. And this is a totally fine and acceptable way of presenting your research statement. Oftentimes when people do this, they'll maybe lay out the grant proposals or what they might apply to as their first and second grant in that statement. And that can be totally fine and totally valid. And for some people, this is going to be the organization that works the best for them. But there's an alternative way of constructing research statements that I actually prefer and I think helps you to convey who you are as a scientist. And this is to highlight your major aims and questions that you're interested in. So this is kind of like you're turning your research statement sort of into a grant proposal, but not fully like a grant proposal. And instead of listing things off in sort of a linear way with time, you're actually coming up with like 3 major questions or 3 major aims that you have worked on in the past and plan to work on in the future. And when I see these kinds of statements, I think it really shows maturity of the applicant, because they can really show, this is what I've accomplished up to the point on this, and this is where I'm going to go in the future on that particular topic or aim. And so it shows that you've got diverse interests, but also that you've packaged them into these different packages and they're all able to be accomplished, and that you're not done with them. You're actually like partway through solving this bigger thing that you might get to 5 or 10 years from now, but you've already made progress on it and you know how to approach that type of question, and you can hit the ground running when you start your lab. So some questions that have come up or other major organizational considerations, and Sunil actually raised these with me earlier today, and I thought I'd just address them right up, is how many aims questions should a research statement have? And then how forward-looking in years should your future vision of your research statement be? And of course, this is going to vary from person to person. Search committee members are going to have different opinions, but I'm just going to come down and put out there the idea that I would, or the answer that I would say, try to aim for 3 major aims, especially if you are going to construct your research statement around aims themselves. People like things in sets of 3s. And this works very well. It looks like a grant proposal in some ways, and it shows that you have good diversity to your program as well. I think that's the safest route. Of course, if you really have a bifurcated program that has two major things, you've got to write it as two major things. That's who you are. And it's all these research statements are going to be customized to who you are. But if you can fit it into three, that would be ideal. Ideally, in terms of thinking into the future, you want to explain like kind of what you're going to work on, especially up and through tenure. So it's like, what is you're going to do to get you to tenure, right? You can add in some details about that longer vision, like, 10 years, we might get to some other place, but you'll probably want to keep that at a minimum. It's more like, what are going to be your first grant proposals? How are you going to build your lab? And that kind of thing are going to be more important to your research vision going forward. Adding effective figures can also be very good for a research statement. This is hard in a 2-page statement, but if you have more than 2 pages, usually you can get at least one figure in there. The best kind of figures I've seen are the ones that are conceptual. So they illustrate something that's hard to, or illustrate something that's hard to describe in words. Let's say you work on plants that are really different in size and you want to describe them. It's really hard to describe that. But if you have a picture of that, that can be like really effective at showing that those plants are very different in size. And there's a reason why you're working on them for that, because they're so different. But having a really nice conceptual figure that kind of runs through your general plans for research, or like conceptually how your ideas fit together, that can be very effective. What I think you want to avoid is the type of figures, really data intensive figures that you might stick in papers. Like if it's got lots of different like words on it and it's like lots of charts and things like that, and it's not immediately obvious what the thing is, that's what you want to avoid. And especially because almost everybody on the search committee is going to be outside of your narrow area of interest, and it's not going to be immediately obvious to them what those figures actually are. So making it generalizable, thinking about that general audience that you're trying to reach, and making conceptual figures that fit with that are really key. Again, you got to recognize that there's a trade-off between adding a figure and page length. Probably don't want to add more than 2 figures to a research statement. Usually one good figure can go a long ways in order to improve your research statement. So you also want to think about including potential sources of funding. So universities, especially research-intensive universities, are very interested in hiring people that are clearly going to be able to establish sustainable, is a key word, externally funded research programs. So they're going to be able to get their first grant, and they're going to be able to get a second grant, and they're going to be able to keep their lab funded, keep their people employed. And in order to do that, you need to demonstrate that your research is interesting to funding agencies. And so as you go through your research statement, you can either at the end lay out your first grant proposals, as in the first way of organizing a research statement, or if you organize it by aims, at the end of each aim, you might say where you might be applying to in terms of getting grant funding for that particular aim. You don't need to be super specific, but you do want to like lay out maybe this funding agency or that funding agency. Getting down into the weeds of very particular program calls and stuff like that usually isn't needed, but just showing that you've been thinking about this can be very worthwhile. Should I list potential collaborators? This is a question that comes up a lot. So people will say, should I list potential collaborators at the university in a research statement? I don't think this is a good idea. We've had lots of discussions about it, and we've come up with a lot of reasons why we don't think this is a good idea. It makes your research statement less reusable, because then you have to go and change the names of collaborators. So you might list the name of somebody, not pull that out, and then send it to a different university. That's not so good. Number 2, it can be actually dangerous to list collaborators. Potentially the collaborator list is somebody that doesn't get along with the rest of the department, or there's someone that's leaving the university, or you can not list somebody and they're like, why did you leave me out? So there's lots of ways that you can actually make this into a negative. So you want to talk about how you're a good collaborator, but you might not want to specifically name collaborators. The place in which you want to name collaborators is if you're asked it as an interview question, either on Zoom or in person. It's a typical question, but you don't need to force it by naming those collaborators up front. You should really wait until that you get that question and be prepared to answer it if asked it. Okay, so I've talked mostly about research-intensive universities, but research statements can also be very important for primarily undergraduate institutions. And my first job was at primarily undergraduate institution, and I think that I probably got hired based on my research background and not based on my teaching background. And the reason for that is that a lot of primarily undergraduate institutions want to bring in people who have a research program, especially one that they can incorporate undergraduates into, so the undergraduates can get the experience of working on research, and then also have people that can bring their research into the classroom. So if you have an organism that you can like grow or work with in a classroom during a semester and incorporate that into the curriculum, that's awesome. I think that those universities are going to love that. So if you're applying to those type of universities, obviously the teaching statement, all these other things are going to be important, but don't forget about the research statement. It is important. You're going to want to gear it much more towards mentoring, training, and teaching, but it can be really, really important still, especially because these places are also going to want you to apply for grants. They may not require you to get a grant for tenure, but they're going to probably require you to apply for grants to get tenure. And so they're going to want to know that you at least have some research activity that you can apply for. You also want to think about incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion into your research statement. A lot more universities are asking explicitly to include this in your statements instead of having a standalone DEI statement itself. So thinking about ways in which you've done this in the past or you plan to do it in the future can be really important. You have to recognize that universities want this because universities have a mission to fulfill, and that's usually to serve a very diverse group of students, especially for state universities that make up the state, that make up the student body, and they want to make sure that the people that they hire are going to serve that community, and also they're going to create an inclusive working environment. So in their laboratories, especially, they're going to make that in their department, in their college, they're going to work towards building a more inclusive working environment. And so any ways you can highlight that in your research statement can be very useful as well. So if you have opportunities and you've participated in things that have incorporated diversity, equity, and inclusion with research already, definitely highlight them. You may not take up a lot of space with that, especially if you only have a 2-page statement, but they're worth highlighting. And they're probably additionally worth highlighting now in states that now are not allowed to have diversity, equity, and inclusion statements. You can still make statements about what you've done in these areas without naming it. And I think that the faculty at those universities will appreciate it. So I do think that it's worth trying to think about ways to incorporate that into your statements going forward. Okay, thinking about what references to include. So people talk about what you need to cite for research statements. And I think oftentimes the most effective thing to cite is your own work in your research statement. You're really using it to explain what you've accomplished so far. So you're citing yourself so that when somebody reads through your CV, they see that paper, they're probably not going to go and read that paper. Search committees simply just don't have enough time, but they will be excited that you've explained the relevance of that paper or the significance of it. And then they can turn around and say like, hey, this person's working on X, Y, and Z. That's really exciting. We should give them an extra look. Let's pass them on to the long list and look at them in more detail where we might actually read papers of them. But they're not going to read papers in the first round. And so it can be very important to cite them. You might add some citations for some really important papers in your field or that fill in some critical gap, but they're usually not necessary. And I don't think I've heard of any search committee member that would expect you to cite them because there's simply not the space usually. It's more about citing what you've done. And you can often say, for seeing the references, see my CV, especially if they're all your papers. And that saves space as well. Key thing to keep in mind and always remind yourself is that search committee members are people. And so they have they have all the issues that normal people have, which is that especially that they're almost all faculty members. Usually there might be a postdoc grad student on there as well. All of them are often under a lot of stress. They've got a lot of other things going on during the semester and other responsibilities. And so you really want to make it easy for them. You want to make that first paragraph clear, really say who you are. You want to have a nice conceptual figure that's easy to interpret, that's exciting, and a way to read through it, the research statement, quickly and be excited about it afterwards. You don't want to get them bogged down with things that aren't clear, or with methods, or with writing it can't be linked to any broader significance. That's going to have them probably just push your statement aside and go on to the next one, because there's just simply so many to look at. The other thing to keep in mind is you're getting the opinions from one person here, and opinions vary absolutely widely on like what is effective and what's not effective. Universities have tried to make these, tried to get rid of all of these biases by making standardized rubrics, but I don't think you really can eliminate all the biases that people have when they read through statements. People read different ways. They're just different. And so, what may be really effective for one search committee may be totally not effective for another search committee, just based on the people on that committee. And it doesn't say anything bad about your application. It's just that it just didn't land with that group of people the way that you wanted it to land. It's the same thing with grant proposals when you write those in the future. You may get a rejection from a grant proposal and get horrible reviews, but you're not going to have the same reviewers next time. And you might put in a very similar proposal and get it funded. And so you just want to keep in mind that different panels and different committees are going to view things differently. Okay, and finally, if you want to see some sample research statements, I always advise people to check out Jeff Ross Ibarra's GitHub, because he has a whole list of research statements and application packages that were successful. And you can look in there and see different examples of what people have done. And you can think for yourself what you think is effective and what's not effective, and try and incorporate that into your own research statements. Okay, so that's what I have. And I'm open to answering any questions at this point.
Thank you, David. This was great. So, and thank you everyone who also submitted some questions during the registration. And so here I have some of those questions. So the first one, people are interested to know, what are your experiences on both sides when you were applying for faculty positions and now that you have been in committees? So if you could just give us like what's your experience on both sides?
Yeah, so applying for faculty positions, I guess I applied for, I think, 4 years in a row when I was applying. In my first year applying, I came out of undergraduate and I had a really good paper. And so people encouraged me to apply that first year. I applied to, I think, 6 jobs, and I got 2 interviews, which was amazing to me. And so that was like really great. And I got that experience. And then I hit what I call the postdoc lull or lag, where you haven't really published your postdoc papers yet, and you're still relying on your PhD papers. And I applied to a lot more jobs next year and got like 1 interview that was kind of bizarre. And then the following year, I applied to a number of places and got an early interview with Cal State Monterey Bay. And they were interviewing people early, as a lot of universities will do, to try to get people before then they leave the job market somewhere else. And so I got the interview there, and they ended up offering the job, and I accepted the position. And then the next 3 days, I got 4 more interview calls, and I had to turn them all down as a result, because I had already accepted this other position. And that encouraged me. I wasn't totally sure I wanted to move back to California. That's where I'm from originally. But I moved out there and it was clear that the position wasn't going to totally work for me for a number of different reasons, both financial as well as the nature of the job itself. And so I got back on the job market the next year, applied, and I had 6 interviews that year. And then I got one job offer, and it was here at Michigan State University. And so I ended up here, and it ended up being a really good department for me to end up in. I'm pretty fortunate to have ended up with the position. But overall, I probably applied to 75 jobs total during that time, and got a number of interviews. But I think that things have become probably even more competitive since then, and that you often have to apply for more. I have sat on a career panel once with my colleague who across in biochemistry, and I was telling people how many jobs I had to apply for, and they were like, no, that's crazy. I just wanted this job and I just applied to this job and I got it. And so that, different people have very different experiences applying. Now, being on the other side of it, seeing the application packages, you do start to see like all the different mistakes that people make in their application packages. And I've tried to cover a lot of those issues here, at least with the research statement side of things. You do see like how many good people are out there applying and how hard it is to select like that set of people for Zoom interviews and then for on-campus interviews, because often there's just simply too many good people. They're just highly qualified. And so, it's again, it reinforces my notion that it's kind of a numbers game and that you do have to apply broadly, often in order to be successful. And then if academic jobs are what you're looking for. And then there's obviously other routes and industry careers and things like that. I'd be happy to talk to folks about that too at some other point as well in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. So we also have one question here from the Q&A box. How much should you tailor your research statement to the job posting? For example, for field research, should you pick a question or aim focus on the system nearby to that institution?
Yeah, so that can be challenging. I know people have done that, tailored it to the location where it's at. You don't necessarily need to, I think. If you have a good system, especially if you're doing field research already in a system and maybe it's far from that university, it's not unreasonable to think that you're going to continue working on that. And you can say simply that you're interested in developing local systems, but I don't think you need to go in and change your research statements that much for it. Really, what universities are trying to hire is they're trying to hire the person, and they're hoping that they're going to come and establish a sustainably funded independent research program that produces good science and trains people and is a nice colleague. And so they want all those things, and you don't necessarily need to tailor your application to the place to suggest that you are all of those things. And so that's why I think it's more important to make sure that you have it as reusable as possible, and maybe do slight tailoring so that you can apply for more jobs without using up too much of your valuable time.
Oh, thank you. One question, how much should I emphasize that my research program is going to be distinct from my postdoc advisor's work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So this is a really field-dependent question. Some fields, it can be very, very important that you're like really differentiated from your postdoctoral advisor. And other fields, it may not matter at all. Regardless, that if you're at a research-intensive university, R1 type university, you're most likely going to have to distinguish yourself from your postdoc advisor in some way. I struggled with this. I have my postdoc advisor and we still work together. And I definitely got feedback of concerns about getting tenure because of my association still with him. But what I learned over time is that what's crucial is that you can put together a body of work that is yours, that has come out of your lab. And if you can show that you have your own body of work, that's going to be enough. And so for myself, that's what I did. I created my own body of work, and then I had the collaborative work that was still with my postdoctoral advisor. That was okay for here. It won't be okay everywhere. And then if you're at a place that's, maybe not as research intensive, sometimes it can be okay to still just be writing grants with your postdoctoral advisor, and the place is just happy to bring in money, through those grants. And so it's really going to be place dependent, and it's going to be field dependent on how important that's going to be.
Great, thank you. You already mentioned during your talk that it's important to say which is going to be your next grant, or like, your project. But is it a good idea also to include the name of the agencies you're going to be applying?
Yeah. So I would say include the name of the agencies. And sometimes it's good to even talk about the part of the agency that you're going to apply to. Some people already know what panel they would be interested in applying to. And if you have that information, why not list it? You don't want to get too detailed, but I do think that doesn't take up very much space to list the name of the panel where you think that grant will go to, or list a couple different places you think it might go. Because obviously, if the same type of research can be funded from multiple different places, especially multiple different funding agencies, then that's really ideal.
Thank you. And people are wondering, what would you think are the key components that search committees are looking for? Like, if you could give a brief summary of key points that the research committees are looking for the research statement.
Yeah,
that you already kind of described.
A lot of them, and it's hard to say. This gets back to my point, is that search committees are full of people that have different opinions, and they're going to be looking at different things. Overall, the search committee is going to be looking at your entire application package, right? They're probably going to, in the first round, what's really going to be important is the cover letter, explaining a lot of aspects of your application package. That first paragraph of your research statement is important to me, important to a lot of people, but not everybody. And then also aspects of your CV are going to be really important. And it depends on how the search committee is set up. And then obviously the teaching statement is going to be important to some people and not as important to other people, but you never want to ignore it, right? It's really important to do a good job with that too. And you'll talk about that in later weeks. But I see so many great scientists that put in amazing research statements and then totally blow off the teaching statement and put just a paragraph. And it's a huge mistake, and they usually get eliminated based on that. So make sure that you have a complete package, because they're trying to hire a complete colleague that can do all the different parts of the job. And that job includes the teaching, the service, the research, all the mentorship, all the different aspects of it.
More questions from the Q&A. So is it useful to have sub-questions or objectives from question under each aim or not?
You can do that. You can have sub-questions under each aim. That's fine. This is really your opportunity to personalize, and whatever you think is going to be most effective at conveying who you are as a scientist and your interests, and not be hard for an outsider to read, then do it. If you make it really complicated, use a lot of jargon from your subfield, or you make lots of different details in there that can be hard to follow, you're not doing yourself a favor. You really want to make it as simple and as straightforward as possible.
If you look back in your first research statement that you wrote, how much do you think you had to change the content until you got your current position?
My first research statements were bad. You can look at my research statement that I used to get this position here, and I don't consider it great at this point. Looking back at it, you can see on Jeff Ross Ibarra's GitHub, it's there. I would have written it very differently now if I knew what I know now. But we learn, and every year you're going to be revising, and every year it's going to get better, and every time you revise, it's going to get better. To be honest, with the MSU one, I wasn't, I was excited about other jobs more. I didn't know that much about this department and that'd be a good fit for me. I probably spent about 15 minutes preparing my application for this job. I just rewrote the cover letter quickly and submitted what I had. right? And that ended up being an interview, whereas jobs that I spent days on or months on, like I got crickets, right? So I think it really taught me that reuse can be very important.
And for a longer statement, how do you think we can best use that extra space?
Definitely working on getting good conceptual figure, and maybe a second figure could be very useful. Like providing you space for that. You can really flesh out things in a little more detail as well. Maybe have a future vision part to it that you might not fit in there as well in a shorter statement. But yeah, it's gonna vary greatly among people.
I guess you already touched a little bit during your talk. Is it a good idea to add the name of future collaborators? So you already mentioned some of the
like I said, probably not a good idea.
How to address a research statement if the candidate has more than 12 years of work experience? Like, I mean, I don't think if this question is if the person has been a postdoc for more than, for a long time. Is that something that needs to be addressed in the research statement?
I think certainly it would be worth explaining the career arc. I mean, in this case, it might be worth explaining the career arc, at least, even if you're going to structure it, not following career arc, to explain, like, what you were doing during that 12-year period of time, how you've built up your career, and especially use the cover letter to explain that and explain why you're interested in applying for academic jobs now. Because certainly people come out of industry back to academia from time to time, or people have, very different career trajectories. They go work for a place like the Joint Genome Institute and then go into academia. And so being able to explain like what you've done and accomplished during that period of time, and especially why that may have set you up to being a good faculty member that will be able to put together an independent program, can be great. The concern is that if you've been off for that period of time and you're not writing first author publications and you're not showing clear signs of leadership, then the search committee is going to have concerns that you're really you are somebody who works on projects, but you're not a leader. And you need to show that you're going to be a leader in order to get hired, especially at R1 University. And so showing that leadership, demonstrating different ways, explaining how you're a leader throughout the application package is crucial.
Thank you. Is it worth trying to apply for faculty job directly for final year of PhD?
Yeah, we've hired people out of their PhD here. If you have a good record and you look like you have, it's all about trajectory, right? So oftentimes what search committees are looking at is they're looking at evidence that somebody is building up, right? And lots of places would love to hire that person who's really about to take off right when they're at the end of grad school, right? You've got them before everybody else does. And so certainly if you think you're in that category, and there's some people are, you should apply. Now, it can be harder if you don't have any papers out yet, if that's going to be really difficult to get a job. Although Rich Lenski had a previous student, had one paper and I think got a job at Stanford. This was years ago, but it has happened. So I think that, there are possibilities, and you shouldn't count yourself out from applying early. And oftentimes I see postdocs waiting too long to start applying. That's probably more of a mistake than applying too early, because you apply too early, even if you don't get anything, you still have a nice application package that's ready to go when you're ready to apply. So the big mistake is waiting too long and then realizing, wow, I really should have applied for things this last season.
Okay. Should industrial research experience can be also included in the research statement?
Industrial research experience?
For example, if there's, they're saying if there's no paper or any patent to show the productivity, is it still okay to put that in the research statement?
Well, again, this is why the research statement is useful and not just, and it's better than just having a CV. It's a place to explain those things, right? Explain what you did there, well, what you're allowed to talk about, at least in that context, what you did there, and then explain why that sets you up better for the job, right, going forward. I mean, having experience in industry is probably a great thing for a lot of faculty members and can probably make them better advisors and can make them think about science in a different way. But explaining the why is what's really important to do there.
How to find the exact research gap and how to formulate the appropriate hypothesis for research.
Right. I mean, this is a difficulty we all struggle with, is like, where are the gaps in the research? I think that's always an important thing. I think it's maybe in some ways, a little less important for these research statements, because you're not going to be talking about one particular hypothesis unless you're like thinking about a big hypothesis, right? You're talking about kind of bigger questions, bigger like areas that you're going to be working on and how you're going to be approaching them. Of course, if you can identify a gap in the literature and that you can demonstrate that you are making progress towards closing that major gap, that's awesome, right? That's going to be very exciting to a search committee. Going about identifying that's simply usually a product of reading a lot of the literature, keeping up with what's going on, and keeping in mind how your research might fit into those things you've seen from the literature.
Is it a good idea to have an unpublished figure to support the proposed topic?
You can definitely have unpublished figures in your research statement. Sometimes, like, maybe you have that figure that you think is going to be a science paper, right? That would be great to get in your research statement, as long as you're not worried about getting scooped. But they should stay confidential, all of these things. So yeah, you might have this really great figure, but you haven't published the paper yet, and you want to show the search committee like what you're doing. That's an opportunity to put it in there. It's just, be careful about putting something in there that's, like, again, overly complex, hard to read, hard to decipher, especially for a non-specialist. So you still want to avoid that issue, but that highlighting ongoing research that's not published yet, that is a key use of the research statement.
And I think we have time for one or two more questions. So I am currently a postdoc in the same lab where I did my dissertation. Do you think I need a postdoc in another lab from another institution in order to be competitive in applying for jobs? I am mostly interested in positions that include research at liberal art colleges.
I think that you're probably going to be able to apply now. If you're in the postdoc position, you might as well, like, give it a shot, put together the application package and see how it goes. It's really going to depend, but I don't think it's going to be a total detriment to you to stay in the same place, especially if you're applying for liberal arts types or PUI type institutions. It's going to be more based on what is your teaching background as well, and that's going to be important. And whether you can bring, if they have a research component to that place, whether you can bring a research program that's going to be useful for mentoring and teaching.
And a last question, what's the benefit of doing a postdoc then if it's great to apply after a PhD?
So most people are not in a competitive position coming out of just a PhD for academic jobs. Usually you're going to be up against other candidates that have built or have shown once in their PhD that they can do something successfully, and then they can show that they built a research program in their postdoc as well. And that's going to be good evidence that that person can establish a research program at a university as an assistant professor. And so you will be up against lots of people that have that experience and have shown that already. And so it's going to probably only be folks that have been very lucky, mostly, I think, in their PhD, maybe exceptional in certain ways, that are going to be able to land a job straight out of their PhD these days.
Maybe time for one more question. What are your thoughts on citing preprints in your research statement?
Absolutely do it, and put preprints in your CV. And it's a way. And what you don't want to do, so since we're now in the preprint era, is you want to be able to show that preprint. If you write in prep, that means nothing. So, it'll also frustrate some committee members. I don't really care, but some committee members will really dislike that. So it's much better to have your thing as a preprint, have it out there on your CV as a preprint, and cite it as that in your research statement.
Okay, well, thank you so much, David. This was great. Thank you, everyone, also for asking questions or for participating. I just want to remind everyone that the recording of this workshop will be available in our YouTube channel. And I also want to just briefly share my screen again, just to tell everyone that next week, we have our second workshop, and we're going to be discussing about cover letter. It's important to know that we have a different registration form. So people that are interested, we're going to have all the information in our social media, but please register. We will be sending the Zoom details for logging. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. This was a great workshop. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add. If not, well, thank you, everyone, and see you next week. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Yeah.